To our viewers in North America and around the globe, my name is Mike Embley. Our top stories. America's First Lady meets children separated from their parents at the US border as her husband's government tries to work out how to reunite them. Nearly 200 people are still missing from the ferry disaster in Indonesia. The captain has been detained for questioning. Argentina's hopes of reaching the knockout stages of the World Cup suffer a blow with a 3-0 defeat to Croatia. And last, on a global scale, millions of people around the world celebrate the International Day of Yoga. Hello. Apparently, in response to worldwide outrage, President Trump has declared that US government agencies should begin trying to reunite more than 2,000 migrant children with their parents. The children, many no more than babies, were taken away under the Trump administration's new zero-tolerance policy, introduced 2 months ago. But there is great confusion over how reunification will happen, whether it can even be done at all. And a vote in Congress on new immigration legislation has been postponed. More from our correspondent, Nick Bryant.
The First Lady has made herself a central figure in this row. They decided to a detention center in Texas where more than 50 children are being kept. Publicly, she's called for a country that governs with heart. Privately, she's pressed her husband to reverse the policy of taking children from their parents. And today came questions that any mother might ask. When will families be reunited? And in what conditions are children being detained?
I know you house children on a long-term basis. And I also like to ask you how I can help to these children to reunite with their families as quickly as possible.
Much is being made of the coat she was filmed wearing, bearing the slogan, "I really don't care, do you?" Words which seem to contradict her actions. Her office said there was no hidden message. Today she completely upstaged her husband, who stayed in Washington, where he lashed out at his Democratic critics.
So they want us to take care of bed space and resources and personnel and take everybody and, like, let's run the most luxurious hotel in the world for everybody. But they don't want to give us the money.
There's been a concerted attempt by the Trump administration to put a caring face on what's been slammed as the cruelest of policies. These pictures released by the US government showing classrooms rather than cages, meals not wire meshing, even the wonderful world of Disney. The youngest are being kept in what the Trump administration calls tender age facilities, terminology that Democrats have seized upon.
I've seen the pictures of these tiny little girls with forlorn looks on their faces. It breaks your heart. And they're being placed into what is being called tender age facilities. That's an Orwellian term, if there ever was one.
In the immigration debate on Capitol Hill, Democrats can't agree with Republicans, and the Republicans can't agree amongst themselves. With congressional elections looming, Washington is obsessed with the politics of immigration. But for the parents of separated children, it's the practicalities that count. How are they going to get their kids back? How are they going to prevent them being lost in the system? In the halls of Congress, a process which served as a reminder to warring politicians of who's in the crossfire of this battle. Children. Nick Bryant, BBC News, Washington.
Police have detained the captain of an Indonesian ferry, one of the few survivors of a disaster that's left nearly 200 people missing and feared dead. The captain was one of just 18 found alive. The BBC's Rebecca Henschke reports from Jakarta that Indonesia's president has called for a review of maritime safety.
Hopes are fading that any more survivors or even bodies will be pulled from this volcanic lake, one of the deepest in the world. And that means many grieving families won't be able to even bury their loved ones. That includes mothers, children, and many young couples. Amongst the grief is also anger, frustration at the pace of the rescue effort, and also that the boat was allowed to go out that day in bad weather, with 3 times the maximum number of passengers permitted on board. The captain was amongst the few people who were rescued after the boat went down in bad weather, and he's being now questioned by the police, who say he owned that vessel that he was operating illegally without tickets or a manifest. Survivors have said there weren't enough life jackets on board, and as the ship went down, they desperately fought each other for those that were available. This is Indonesia's worst maritime disaster in recent years, but both accidents here are common, and scenes like this are eerily familiar. President Joko Widodo has called for a review of the safety laws at sea and said local authorities will be held accountable for not enforcing them. But millions of people rely on often traditional boats to get around this vast archipelago, many of those boats not even having basic safety on board. Observers say promises of reform have been made before, and they want to see major changes to stop a disaster like this from happening again. Rebecca Henschke, BBC News, Jakarta.
Turkey's President Recep Tayyip Erdogan has acknowledged that this Sunday's presidential and parliamentary elections might now run so close that they'll produce a coalition government. BBC correspondent Mark Lowen has been travelling the country to canvass opinion.
2-year-old Neval never knew her mum. She was shot in the neck by Turkish police and died after the birth. Her grandma raises her, her father is in prison, and she doesn't know the truth. They were, say the family, innocently caught up in clashes between PKK Kurdish militants and government forces. The same government President Erdogan is hoping to lead again after Sunday's election.
When Neval grows up, I'll tell her the state killed her mother and put her father in prison. I hate Erdogan for what he's done to my family. If he came here, I'd spit in his face. God damn him.
But he did come here to Kurdish-dominated southeast Turkey, not a region where he has a majority, but in this tight election, he needs Kurdish votes to win. Women are separated from men at his rallies, unheard of before he took office.
Tek millet, tek bayrak.
One nation, one flag, one homeland, one state, he cries. They cheer the leader of a big NATO power and a key Western ally on Syria and the migrant crisis. The reverence President Erdogan still commands from pious Turks is almost godlike. The question is whether it can beat the acute loathing felt by the other side of the nation. This election is now a fight between two halves of profoundly polarized Turkey, a battle for the soul of this pivotal country. Security is heavy here. The pro-Kurdish party is called terrorists by the government, its candidates standing for election from prison. Many fear vote rigging by the Erdogan machine. Across this vast country, a different picture in the president's Black Sea stronghold. He's built support with new schools and hospitals. The economic boom is now stalling, but this is a region of loyalists. Like Cemal Bayar, whose family has tended hazelnut groves for generations and whose devout following is cultivated by the Islamist president.
If Erdogan says a road will be built here, it's done in 3 days. We are happy that a Muslim country is ruled by a Muslim president. He is not a dictator, he is a world leader.
Beneath a cloak of fear, dissent here is whispered. We met the wife of a police chief jailed after the failed coup, one of over 200,000 arrested or sacked. Critics say it's a purge of all opponents.
The hardest is the loneliness, that my daughter is without a father. We don't know what's worse, destroying our future or Turkey's justice system. What Erdogan is doing is a crime against humanity.
This political choice will determine livelihoods, a vote for the shape, perhaps the survival, of Turkish democracy. Mark Lowen, BBC News in Turkey.
Biggest shock so far of the tournament in football's World Cup. In Russia, Lionel Messi's Argentina are on the brink of going out after a 3-0 thrashing by Croatia. Our correspondent in Moscow, Austin Hellwood, has the story.
In Messi and Aguero, Argentina have two of the best forwards in club football, but on the international stage, they struggle for support. Enzo Perez missing an open net, the frustration clear to see. But for all the mistakes at the top of the pitch, the worst came at the back. Willy Caballero misjudging a chance Ante Rebic wouldn't miss. In the end, Argentina was so poor, it was hard to watch, and it only got worse. Luka Modric, simply magnificent. Ivan Rakitic added the gloss to send Croatia through, the mighty Argentina fallen, and now depending on others. The passionate Peru and their fans have made themselves known in Russia, but on the biggest stage, one mistake can be all it takes. France pouncing on the loose ball, Peru punished by Mbappe. Still, the South Americans' press, denied only by the woodwork, but that's as close as they came. A first World Cup in 36 years over. Their fans left thinking what could have been. France heading to the knockout stage, but nowhere near their best. For some, it will only ever be a dream. No one expects Denmark and Australia to be there at the end, but Christian Eriksen was determined to show what he can do. Power, precision, pure happiness. But it wouldn't last long. A handball spotted by the video referee, Mili Jedinak pulling Australia level. In the end, honours even, and qualification for both still a possibility. Austin Hellwood, BBC News.
Much more to come for you on BBC News, including this. A first baby in more ways than one, as Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern gives birth while in office. We'll have more on New Zealand's newborn. Very good to have you with us on BBC News. One main headline for you this hour. America's First Lady has been meeting children separated from their parents at the Mexican border as her husband's government begins the job of trying to reunite them. Well, let's stay with that story. We can go live to our correspondent in Washington, BBC's Chris Buckler. Chris, let's come to Melania Trump in a moment if we can. It does look as if new immigration law has been pushed down the road, doesn't it? But what are the chances of reuniting these families? No fingerprints were taken, as I understand it, no DNA, and many of these people, of course, don't speak English.
I think there are going to be attempts to reunite families, but actually, beyond the political, there is that practical question of how that's going to happen. Are there the facilities, for example, to house so many families, and the practical business of getting children, who in some cases have been sent many miles away from their parents, back into a position where they are with them, is very, very difficult. And in the past, they've been kept by two separate departments, the Department of Justice and also the Department of Health and Human Services. Now, under what has been suggested here by President Trump, it's a third agency, the Department of Homeland Security, who will actually house the families going forward. But as I say, there's that question of accommodation as well as the practical reality of bringing them together. And it's not even clear that the law as it stands will allow them to be held together for longer than 20 days anyway.
And then the First Lady visits a facility, shows every indication of feeling real concern, but wears this tone-deaf graffiti-style jacket, which has caused a great fuss. Her people say it really doesn't matter, try to brush it off, but then her husband sets the whole thing alight again.
Yeah, let's just remind you of what the message on the back of the coat said. It said, "I really don't care, do you?" Now, as you say, the First Lady's spokeswoman was very clear to point out that there was no intended message, that it was just a fashion item. The reality is, though, that the President has now weighed into this, and her husband says that actually it was an intended message, and it was a message to the fake news media that she doesn't care about them or how she is covered. The reality is if you take a look at what Melania Trump has said during the week, and remember, she released that statement at the weekend in which she very clearly seemed to put daylight between her and her husband, saying that America needs to be governed with a heart. Now, that seemed to be a tacit criticism of her husband, and she's also made the effort to go to the border to one of these facilities, and I think that shows that she is troubled by what she's seen, that she is deeply concerned. But you have to say, in terms of fashion, it doesn't seem to be the best choice.
Chris, thank you very much for that. Now, welcome to our village, we won. That is how the Prime Minister of New Zealand announced the birth of her baby girl. Jacinda Ardern is only the second elected leader to give birth while in office. She will take 6 weeks of maternity leave before heading back to work, leaving Deputy Prime Minister Winston Peters in charge for now. Howard Griffith has more.
Beaming parents and their new arrival. Jacinda Ardern chose social media over a state announcement to share news of her daughter's birth. The message reads, "Welcome to our village, we won." Throughout her very public pregnancy, Jacinda Ardern made a point of continuing with business as usual. After 6 weeks of maternity leave, she plans to be back at work as her partner, Clark Gayford, becomes the main caregiver. In a BBC interview in April, she suggested the baby could also join her on the international stage.
There are certain places that are hosting meetings in the future, and places, you know, and particularly in the Pacific, where they've said, bring the baby. We're great with children. Just bring the child, we'll take care of it. So I think it'll take an international community to raise our child.
The baby's arrival has been celebrated here as a national triumph. Former Prime Minister Helen Clark was one of the first to tweet, lauding the family's parenting arrangements as gender equality in action. Theresa May also sent her congratulations to the new parents on the birth of their little girl. The man in charge of New Zealand for the next 6 weeks also sent his best wishes.
Wishing the Prime Minister the very best, and Clark Gayford as well, and that she gets a solid start to motherhood, so to speak.
That solid start may be followed by some sleepless nights, but Jacinda Ardern says she will remain contactable and keep reading cabinet papers once she's taken her baby home. Howell Griffith, BBC News.
Let's briefly round up some more of the main news for you. There have been protests in the Spanish town of Pamplona, where a court has ordered the provisional release of 5 men convicted of sexually assaulting a young woman. During the annual bull running festival in April, they were sentenced to 9 years in jail for sexual abuse, but acquitted of rape. They are appealing against their conviction. Coco the gorilla, who famously learned to communicate with more than 1,000 hand signals, has died in California. She was 46. Here she's with one of many celebrity admirers, Flea from the Red Hot Chili Peppers. Coco was born at the San Francisco Zoo and trained by her instructor there to convey thoughts and feelings. She also adopted and named pets, including a kitten called All Ball. A spin-off programme from the Roseanne sitcom is going to be made with the original cast, but without its creator, Roseanne Barr. I don't think those are the pictures we plan to show you. ABC, of course, ended its deal with her in the wake of her racist tweet about an advisor to Barack Obama. Now, an electric car sharing scheme in Paris has run into financial difficulties and been cancelled. The Autolib scheme allowed cars to be hired by credit card and parked in designated spaces around the city. But authorities refused to help fund the scheme when it announced a multi-million-euro hole in its budget. Andrew Plant reports.
Small, silver and made for sharing, the Autolib cars have become a familiar sight on the streets of Paris over the past 7 years. But despite their popularity, the French authorities are pulling the plug on the capital's electric cars. And they're putting the brakes on so abruptly, it's left many in the lurch.
Even just for the next week, I don't know what I will do in the mornings. There are 2 days when I'll start work early in the morning. I'll figure it out, but it's a little brutal.
Launched in 2011 by businessman Vincent Ballot, the cars were booked by credit card with charging points across Paris, a way to meet commuter needs and curb air pollution. But financial difficulties followed. A recent request by the Ballot Group for €233 million towards a budget shortfall was refused by French authorities. Campaigners, though, are determined the scheme should continue.
We're all very happy that Autolib exists. We say it all the time. It's very practical. It changed the way we experience commuting in the city. Now it's as if somebody told us, tomorrow we are cancelling the bus service. No more buses.
The cars had issues with cleanliness, problems with parking, as well as stiff competition from apps like Uber. Parisian authorities have now suspended the service. The scheme's operators say they will appeal. an abrupt end to a scheme that many once saw as the cleaner, greener future of inner-city commuting. Andrew Plant, BBC News.
Now, Scottish musicians, of course, have found success across the world, and a new show at the National Museum in Edinburgh explores the musical culture of the nation. Our arts editor, Will Gompertz, went in search of the essence of Scottish pop.
Back in the 70s, the Bay City Rollers wore their Scottishness on their sleeves. A decade later, the Edinburgh-based Proclaimers were riffing on the city's weather. An interest in meteorology shared by the Glaswegian band Travis in the 90s. More recently, it's been the Mercury Prize-winning band Young Fathers going down a storm as a voice and look of 21st century Scotland. As this exhibition graphically demonstrates, the list of world-class musical acts that have come out of Scotland is long and illustrious. But is there a common thread, something that unites them all, that captures the essence of what could be called Scottish pop? I don't want to love, here is a lady who should know. I just need a friend.
What literally links everybody in this room is great songs. The Scots seem to have a real knack for it. I don't know if that comes from the DNA of folk music that was written, whether it's in the air. We have something to say. Basically, you can't really shut us up, so maybe that's why we like to write a tune and say something.
The show also looks back at the pubs, the clubs and the venues that have nurtured Scotland's up-and-coming bands, such as the legendary Barrowland in Glasgow.
I think most of the bands in Scotland have either played in the Barrowland or it's the endeavour to play at the Barrowland. That is their goal in life. Once they've played the Barrowland, they don't care where else they play.
Some of the musicians featured in this exhibition have stayed. Others have strayed to go to London and beyond. But wherever they've ended up, what this show emphatically tells you is they were all made here in Scotland. Will Gompertz, BBC News, Edinburgh.
People all over the world have been marking International Yoga Day. It is an event recognised by the United Nations. It began in 2014. It's meant to foster peace and understanding, with millions meditating on different continents. The BBC's Tim Allman explains.
In India, they take their yoga very seriously indeed. Tens of thousands of people stretching, breathing, centering themselves. Among them Prime Minister Narendra Modi, hoping to combine the political with the spiritual.
Friends, from Tokyo to Toronto, from Stockholm to Sao Paulo, yoga has become a positive influence in the lives of millions.
All across the country they were doing it. Here, officers from the Indo-Tibetan Border Police saluting the sun amidst the frozen heights of the Himalayas. Or here, aboard an aircraft carrier docked in Mumbai, armed forces personnel, presumably using military mantras. And it wasn't just India, this was Disneyland Paris, a free yoga class laid on for hundreds of people. Even Goofy had a go. In New York, the very epitome of intense, high-speed, 24-hour-a-day living, a moment of calm transcendence.
I love coming here because I come to work and it's very chaotic, but today when I come, I'm able to, like many people, find the quiet.
It was a bit more of a challenge, the juxtaposition of yoga and pollution and noise, but it actually made me feel even more centered.
And in Rio de Janeiro, at the foot of Christ the Redeemer, they meditated for peace. Namaste on a global scale. Tim Allman, BBC News.
Just briefly a reminder of our top story. America's First Lady has met children separated from their parents at the Mexican border as her husband's government begins the job of trying to reunite more than 2,000 of them. It is far from clear how that's going to be done, if it's even possible. Efforts to pass a new immigration law have been postponed for now. More on that, more on all the news anytime on the BBC website, and you can reach me and most of the team on Twitter. I'm at BBC Mike Embley. Thanks for watching. Come again.